I'll just be blunt. I really don't like taking hay to a high lactating cow.
There's a lot of things to consider when it comes to figuring out just when is the right time to calve for your operation. There's everything from forage timing to labor costs and even your cow's nutritional curve. Today, Dr. Bob Larson with Kansas State University and their College of Veterinary Medicine is my guest as we discuss the 5 questions you should ask yourself as you evaluate when to calve. Plus, our discussion will also lead into one of the simplest ways to add pounds and profit without changing genetics or feed.
How many can I get pregnant in that first 21 to 30 days? That really shows me that my cows are matching my environment really well, that I've got my winter or off-season forage management pretty well handled, and my bulls are going into the breeding season in good shape and fertile.
And at the end of the day, it really does come down to having a firm grasp on your gross income over your cow costs and whether that spits out a positive number.
Income's on the numerator and costs are on the denominator, and that's really what I'm interested in.
From breeding weather and feed cost to purebred timing, retaining ownership, we're all digging into the economics and the practicality of rethinking your calving window. That's on today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hi, everyone. Justin Mills with the Working Ranch Radio Show. Good to have you joining us on our program here today. As you heard there in the opening, we're going to be talking about that calving time of the year, calving window, all of those conversations that come together in that vein of thought, and a conversation that I think has a lot of practicality for many of us in the ranching industry. It doesn't matter whether you're a commercial guy or whether you're purebred, registered outfit. I think you'll find our conversation here good. It's always beneficial, I think, that we be a little self-reflective and analyze our own management operations from time to time. And I think that conversation will bring out some things here today that will help you doing that in looking at this subject of that calving window. Before we jump into that, just a couple things. I don't know if you've had the opportunity here recently to listen to some of the episodes here that we've had on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Last week, we were talking about getting a legal perspective on estate planning. That was a conversation that we had a couple of years ago with Dal Houston. He's an attorney out of Oklahoma. A great conversation on that. Estate issues is always something that I think we could talk an awful lot about. But more than talking, we need to also be doers on some of that, as what we hear and what we're talking about with that particular concept of estate planning, I think is very relevant to a lot of different ranches across the country. Also, we've recently had a conversation doing more with less. That was with Chip Kemp. He's with 701X. But we're really getting into just talking about some of the technology that we're seeing in our industry when it comes to things like ear tags, water monitoring systems, as well as virtual fencing, just a lot of those things and how that is playing into our industry as we look ahead in that. So I think you'll find some of those, as well as many of the other shows that we've had here on the program over the years, very valuable. If you missed something here today or you want to go back and listen to those, you can find all of our shows on our podcast site at workingranchradio.com, or if you have a preferred podcast provider, you can download it there. And also, it's very helpful. Leave us a comment, rating, or a review. We would appreciate that as well. That kind of gives us a gauge, an idea of if the shows that we're doing is on target with what you folks are wanting to hear out there. Hey, the September-October issue of Working Ranch Magazine is out. In fact, it's been out for a couple weeks. It does have the annual cattle care catalog in it as well. So take a look at that latest issue. If you don't have a subscription, you can do it by simply going to workingranchmag.com and start your subscription today. Or you can also walk into your local Tractor Supply store, check out their shelf, and you can pick one up off the shelf. If your Tractor Supply store doesn't have one, well, you let me know, and we'll get that taken care of. But shout out here to the Tractor Supply store in Dickinson, North Dakota, in Dixon, Illinois, in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, and in Gallup, New Mexico. Just two of those four I've been at. I've been to Dickinson, I've been to Gallup, but I've not been to Dixon, Illinois, or Fort Walton Beach, Florida, but maybe someday I'll have that opportunity to do that. Nevertheless, if you are by your Tractor Supply store, be sure to check on the shelf there for your latest copy of Working Ranch Magazine. Hey, make sure you stay tuned in through the entire program. Later on in the show, we'll have meteorologist Don Day as we take a look at our long-range weather. It'll give us kind of an idea. It is that time time of the year where we're seeing a lot of different changes and weather patterns happening across the country. And it's also the time when a lot of us are doing cow work or cattle are on the road, moving from one location to the next. So if you want to find out what the weather's going to look like for the next 7 to 10 days out, make sure you tune in later on in our show, as we'll be talking with meteorologist Don Day about that. Real quick, before we jump into our interview, we wanted to kind of give you a little teaser of some of the programs and shows that we are working on, upcoming editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Back in January, I think it was, I had Dr. Kenny Burdine with the University of Kentucky joining me. We were talking about 4 cattle market questions that we hope to see answered in 2025. He's going to come on with us here in a week or so, and we're going to be talking about that. And also, I have some questions with him regarding buying or developing heifers, especially in this time where we see extremely high market prices. So we'll talk with Dr. Burdine on that. Also, in fact, this will be coming up next week. Neville Spear will be joining us. He's, of course, an industry consultant and somebody that I've enjoyed having conversation with him and his thoughts on a variety of topics. We're going to be talking a lot of different things, different pieces of some hot button topics that will come into that conversation with him, mainly focusing somewhat on why are we seeing a decline in the number of ranch families or ranches in the United States, but also cattle market, country of origin labeling, animal ID, and just a variety of things that we're going to cover in that conversation. So be sure to tune in next week for that. And also working with Lance Zimmerman, who is with a senior beef industry analyst for Rabobanks, working with him as we talk about with him on looking at this cow herd rebuilding and how that's taking shape. So a lot of great shows we have coming up here on the program. So make sure you tune in on our upcoming editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, let's turn to our program here today. And joining us here on the program is Dr. Bob Larson. He is with Kansas State University in their College of Veterinary Medicine, a professor there. And Dr. Larson, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Good to be here.
Well, our topic that we're going to hit here today does have a lot of caveats or things that we need to throw around this when we start talking about adjusting a calving window with our cow herd. A lot of things to consider, a lot of factors to consider in that, isn't there?
Yes, there really are. And one of the things I try to be a little bit careful on is geography. Most of my work has been here in the upper Great Plains, Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas. And, so I'm used to kind of the forage and the weather of the area of the country where I've spent most of my time. And I have to be a little bit careful because even some of the concepts are the same no matter where you live. The months that we were talking about that may be some advantages and disadvantages might be a little bit different in different geographic areas.
Yeah. As we start to look at some of these factors that we need to consider, let's go back to the beginning and say, why would we be looking at this? What would be some of the reasons for adjusting our calving window compared to where we're at currently?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the reasons sometimes people bring up the idea of changing their calving window is if they've had a particular difficulty weather-wise, particularly cold winter and they're calving in the winter, maybe a particularly wet spring if they're calving, in early spring. So sometimes this conversation comes up because there's been some real challenges associated with calf death loss, associated with just the environment, the weather that those calves are born into. And I think that's something that needs to be considered you want to be confident that it's likely that you'll have a minimum number of really tough environmental days during your calving season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think of another conversation that comes up when we started talking about adjusting calving window could be even the conversation of tightening it up versus a lengthy period. So, expand on that a little bit. Right.
Well, a lot of times when you talk to universities, they will say that they're kind of aiming for that 60 to 65 day calving window. And I actually do support that. I think that's a pretty good target. I'm a little more lenient, and then you can allow that to maybe get a little bit longer. But what you really want is a high percentage of your cows calving in a relatively short period of time. And really meaning I'd like a lot of my cows calving in that first 21 days, meaning that they were cycling at the start of the breeding season. The bulls were fertile and ready to go. And we had a good breed up the first 21, 30 days of the breeding season. Therefore, we'll have a pretty tight calving season. And that's why I'm a little bit lenient on how long it is. If I'm really successful in the first 30 days, that means that there's a relatively small number of cows to calve the rest of the year. And I'm okay with that straggling a little bit, just not very much. But it's almost more about how many can I get pregnant in that first 21 to 30 days that really shows me that my cows are matching my environment really well, that I've got my winter or, off-season forage management pretty well handled, and my bulls are going into the breeding season in good shape and fertile.
Mm-hmm. I think when we talk about that, I want to expand a little bit more and talk about that, tightening that up a little bit. Just running some rough numbers here on my calculator. You could put, if you can average an extra 20 pounds, a calf that's born, maybe 60, 70 days out there versus a calf born in that first cycle. Yeah, it's roughly 20 to 30 pounds more, isn't it? And then you figure let's say $4.50, just conservatively say, you're looking at $100 difference in the price of a calf, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of times, we look at lots of different strategies to add weaning weight, but one of the best ways is adding days. And so those, if they're, and different herds are going to be different, but I go kind of with the estimate that maybe 2.25 to 2.5 pounds a day gain on these calves. So 10 days is, 25 pounds.
Yeah.
And so that starts to add up really quickly. And that's the type of difference I really have I struggle to see with my eyes. Calves that are 10, 15, 20 days older, meaning, they're 25 to 50 pounds heavier, they may not look any different than their herd mates that are just a little bit younger. But if I have a high percentage of the herd that are about as old as that herd can be, then again, my average weaning weight goes up, and I didn't change the genetics. I didn't really change the nutrition. I just changed the time when those calves were born and the number of days that they have alive before they're weaned. And the interesting thing is that even carries through if I'm going to retain ownership, on past weaning into a back running phase or up till they're yearlings. A lot of times that weight difference, or at least a lot of that weight difference, is maintained. So I've still got more pounds to sell just because they're a little bit older.
Yeah. Along those same lines, you talk about retained ownership, which means that it's that next phase of that calf onto that yearling phase. But that's also not only the calves that are going off farm, but it's those heifers that are staying on farm. They're mature, a little bit more mature, a little ahead of the game. And that ability, again, of rebreeding that we're going to get into as we talk through some of this as well.
Yeah, exactly. My oldest heifers are the most likely to fit into my next breeding season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. As we continue to look at this and adjusting the calving window, one of the things is, as you had mentioned, of course, was really keen and be very cognizant of the fact that, the geography of where people are located, we're not going to pick a date on the calendar that's going to nail okay, everybody needs to be calving here. But one of the things I continue to hear, as not only as we talked about shortening this calving window, but also in terms of where we're going to calve in that window in the year, does really come back to labor savings in a lot of this. And at the end of the day, it's financially from a production standpoint and a profitability standpoint.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors to consider. I've been involved with a lot of operations that calve pretty much in the wintertime. And there might be reasons for that, but one of the real challenges besides the opportunity for harsh weather is now I've got that early lactation cow, and I'm really trying to supplement her oftentimes on dormant forage and supplement. Now, those operations that maybe have an annual green forage that's available in the wintertime, that changes my thought process a little bit. I'm one of these people, I think green grass is just magic. For a lactating cow, it makes all my other nutritional challenges really pretty minor. Whereas I take a lactating cow and I've got her on hay or dormant forage, I've got to really make sure I've got that diet balance to provide enough protein and energy that she's going to be able to lactate at the level that she's capable of, and that calf can thrive. So I'm going to show my bias. I don't really like high lactation, early lactation cows. I don't like managing them on dormant forage, particularly hay. I find that a real challenge. A lot of people can make that work, but it is a challenge. I'd much rather have that early lactation cow out on some green grass than I don't have any problems.
Yeah. All right, let's take a break here. And when we come back, you and I talked before we went on air here today about 5 different things that, you can look at as far as where a calf is born at. And of course, all of them would create a different answer of when you would particularly have that calving window take place. I want you to expand on that a little bit. We're going to do that when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. But now, this message from the captain, Tim O'Byrne, editor of Working Ranch Magazine.
Hey everybody, Tim here. We're fixing to come up on 1 million downloads of our Working Ranch radio show podcast, which is really exciting. And it got me to thinking about another viral moment that we had back in 2017 when we ran a short Facebook video of the Safety Zone calf catchers. And it was so popular, it got 6.8 million views in the first 5 days. I want you folks to check it out, Safety Zone calf catchers. It's a great product for all producers. Keep you safe when you're working with baby calves, especially for old timers like me who maybe can't outrun those cows anymore. Check them out, Safety Zone calf catchers.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone calf catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone calf catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
Okay, Dr. Larson, let's continue down as we continue our discussion here of looking at our calving window. One of the first things that you said right off the gate is we don't want to tie anything to geography. We want to be, we need to understand that there's different parts of the country that some of this could take shape and where that calving window is going to fit for folks. Let's go through some of these variables because I thought it was interesting when you and I were talking and prepping for our show here today. You listed out about 5 different areas when you might look at when a calf could be born, and all of those have a different answer. So let's work through those. First one we've already identified a little bit, that being weather.
Right. Yeah. So some of the questions you might ask yourself are, if I could pick, when would I most like the calves to be born, just from the calving weather standpoint? Then the next question is, when would I like my calves to be born to really match that cow lactation with abundant forage? So that's another answer. Then you start asking, well, when would I like that cow to be bred? And that might be particularly important as we move farther south. You get into humidity, you get into fescue, those types of things. Bull performance, cow performance probably too, really goes down during the hottest days of the year. So that's in consideration. Well, then you think also about the prices of these calves. So the cyclical nature of wean calf prices and the cyclical nature of both fed cattle prices and yearlings. There's an optimum time if you go back kind of to a steady growth rate of when those calves were born. And what I've kind of found is that'll give you a complicated answer because those don't align, where the very best calving season doesn't necessarily align with the very best forage production or the best calf prices or the best yearling prices. And so you do have to do a little bit of trade-offs and identifying what's optimum. And then we didn't really even get into some of the things like labor. So if you're in a diversified farming operation and you have to calve cows out at the time when you're, planting and harvest are the 2 busiest times for a diversified operation. And so those labor constraints go into it. So there's a lot of those factors that I think should enter your mind as you're trying to kind of optimize of all those factors, what's going to be the best for me.
Mm-hmm. I think in some of this, as you're going through that, Dr. Larson, is the fact of, and you mentioned it there, labor, but even those folks that aren't in a diversified farm operation, labor sometimes the unaccounted for cost that we really don't analyze.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go back to the tight calving window. Personally, I'm pretty enthused at the beginning of calving season, and the days aren't quite as long and the work's not quite as hard, and it gets longer and harder as the time goes along. That's another reason, if I've got a lot of my calving out of the way in 21 to 30 days, it changes my labor distribution. Yes, I have to work really hard, but it's for, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And then there's only a few more cows to calve, and versus being really at a steady pace for 2 or 2.5, 3 months. I think that's something also to consider, that part of the labor management is getting them front end loaded so that I can, if I need additional labor, be it family or hired, but they're just really during that first 30 days when most of the cows are calving, and then we can kind of adjust labor as you get down to the rest of the cows.
Mm-hmm. Let's go through those 5 questions you have to ask yourself. And I'm sure you've had producers ask you, okay, I get it. I understand those 5 things you just mentioned there, from weather to, getting those cows to rebreed, to time of the year, getting them bred back, marketing, whether you're going to sell them as weaned calves or whether you're retaining ownership. Now walk me through or that conversation with somebody to say, okay, here's how we weight that, or how would you then go to that next step and say, okay, yeah, we got to analyze that, but then let's work me through as a rancher. How do I figure that out?
Yeah. I think you have to have a handle on your cow costs, because when I'm saying there's 2 things. There's the labor part of, man, I have low labor when cows are out grazing grass, and peak nutrition. And so in the cow's yearly production cycle, her highest nutrient demands are during early lactation. The first 3 months of lactation is really where a lot of that demand is. And the more I can make that easy from a labor standpoint and easy from a balancing her nutritional needs, the better I'm off from that standpoint. And usually that's also the least expensive way to deliver those nutrients is through grazed growing forage, not grazed dormant forage. So again, it's a little bit different of what months that is, but it's kind of like the peak growing season. So for Kansas, that'd be last part of May through June. First part of July is really kind of the peak time for forage in a lot of part of the country. And again, it's going to be different other places. And if I could have her in peak lactation during that time, I'm not taking bales out. I'm not taking a lot of supplement out. So that's a labor saving. And the green grass is really supplying the nutrients that she needs so that she can perform the way we want her to. She can maintain her body condition. She can give that calf the milk that she has the genetic ability to give. And we really kind of align that. So if you're saying, so in my part of the world, so in Kansas, that would be, and a lot of times our leases might start May 1 or something like
Yeah.
that. So you're aligned where you're actually calving maybe just a little bit before that. So we've got some of our calving out of the way before we go to grass in early to mid-May, and then finish off calving out there. And we have really decreased the amount of hay and supplement that I'm handling. So the idea being my cow costs per calf weaned is lower. Now, one other thing that we didn't really talk about is what size calf are these? So if I want the heaviest calf, well, they're just born earlier. So one way to have really heavy calves in October is to have them born in January. But my feed cost to support that cow while she's in high lactation. So she's going to be in high lactation right in the middle of winter, which increases my cow cost. So yes, I'm weaning a bigger calf, but my cow cost is also higher. So that's why I start with, you got to know what your cow costs are. And I will throw some examples. In southern Kansas, you can have winter wheat. So that's a nice growing forage. That would change my answer for somebody that had, an annual green growing forage in the wintertime in some parts of the country. Well, then that's green growing forage, and that matches well with early lactation. So I'll just be blunt. I really don't like taking hay to a high lactating cow.
Yeah, and that's I've got a little tally mark here. That's 2 times you've made that.
I might say it a couple more times.
That's okay, because I think, and I wrote this down here too, and you went right into it, and that was cow costs / feed costs is one of the elements that we have to really analyze in this, that I think is really going to point that arrow a specific direction. When you understand the cow costs and what hay is right now, I mean, it ranges depending on the area you're at. If you've been in a drought area, of course, it's more expensive. If it's been a wet year for you, your hay's probably a little less costly. Nevertheless, let's just figure $150 a ton to up to $200 a ton for hay, and if you're running 4 ton of hay through that cow, there's a lot of your profitability that is lost in that 650 pound calf.
Yeah. That is really true. It's not all about just the income side. You got to balance the income side with the expense side. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind. I'll throw out a couple of reasons why some people do like calving really early, at least in my part of the country, really early in the year. And that's, January, February, first part of March, is that does align pretty well with some pretty high calf prices, particularly if I wean just a little bit early. And then the other thing, if I retain ownership all the way through slaughter, and I'm kind of going for that right after the first of the year calf value, that early calving cow kind of fits that as well. So I'm a little bit cautious, basically, to lecture someone else on when to calve if they've got it figured out for their system. But they need to consider all the expenses. And I've given you a couple of reasons on the income side where some of those early calving cows really do generate a lot of income, but they also have, in my opinion, a lot more expense.
Yeah. One other factor, real quick, we'll hit this, and to kind of go down this road of giving a few folks maybe an exception to the rule in what we're talking about here today. You'd mentioned it already. Sometimes diverse operations that are farming and ranching do that from a labor standpoint. We get that. We've identified that. In our particular area where we have a lot of public ground, there are permits that folks are needing to hit by a certain time of the year. And the last thing you want to do is drop in either a cow that hasn't calved, especially if it's a really wooded area, timber country. Right. Now, if it's open country, it might be a little bit different. But if it's timber country, it might be a little different. You want to stick a calf in there and a cow and a pair that's a little older.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and then the other one that doesn't affect me where I live so much, but in areas where you've got federal lands and a lot of times you're putting multiple herds out there, there's a constraint. You can't take bulls out there. And so breeding has to be done by the time your lease starts. So that throws everything I've been talking about. You have to meet the needs of your grazing lease. And so all of those are exceptions and factors that you do have to consider. And I'll kind of come back to something we said earlier. If I can have a relatively tight calving season, the vast majority of my calves have a little bit of age on them by the time we turn out. There'd be a few that are younger, and I just take that as the cost of doing business. But if there's a lot that are younger, that makes me a little more nervous. Or that haven't calved yet.
Yeah. Okay, let's take another break here. When we get back, I want to talk about some of the other aspects to this. If you're a commercial operation versus a purebred operation, probably some factors to consider in that as well. Let's talk about it when we come back. This segment today brought to you, though, by Allflex. It all starts with the tag, the most trusted portfolio of ID solutions.
It all starts with the tag. Identifying each animal allows you to better manage the entire herd and control your operation's future. For nearly 70 years, producers have chosen Allflex for individual animal management. With Allflex, you get the most trusted portfolio of ID solutions. Whether you need stock or custom visual tags, electronic tags, tissue sampling units for DNA collection, or syringes, bring the Allflex advantage to your operation today. Visit allflexusa.com to learn more.
It's more than a convention. It's where the cattle industry comes together. CattleCon 2026 is heading to downtown Nashville, February 3rd through February 5th. Gain insights from top cattle industry experts, connect with fellow producers, and take part in shaping the future of our business. Plus, world-class entertainment and inspiring keynote speakers. Whether you're there for the business, the education, or the good times, CattleCon is where it all comes together. Register today at convention.ncda.org.
As we continue on, my guest today is Dr. Bob Larson. He is with the College of Veterinary Medicine at Kansas State University. And Dr. Larson, as we are talking about adjusting our calving window at our herds, I want to continue down one more road, and we're going to wrap all this up here at the end as we kind of recap some of this. But I think another thing, one of the things you mentioned as we were going through the different questions is about 5 different things you need to ask yourself as far as where this calving window is going to fit for your particular operation based upon your geography and location. And I think one of the outcomes in all of that is we talked in the last segment about what's our cow cost, what's our input cost to get to that final product that we're going to sell to whoever, whether a commercial outfit or whether you're a purebred outfit. So when we look at the commercial versus the purebred, things could be quite different because we're kind of selling to 2 different audiences here.
Absolutely. I think you have to really have a whole different conversation with a purebred operation because, first of all, they're not selling pounds, they're selling genetics. I mean, they have to, the cattle have to have the age and the performance that they're attractive, but they're really selling genetics and not pounds. So 50 pounds difference doesn't matter. They're going to be sold based on their genetic potential, not 50 pounds difference or 100 pounds difference. And the purebred producer is really dialed in on their customers that are going to take these bulls And usually we're talking long yearlings that are going to go out and start their breeding season. So they want those bulls old enough to perform well for their clients. And they also want them old enough to pass their breeding soundness exam in conjunction with when their sale is. And so then they need to start, my customers want to buy cattle at this time. So I've got my sales set up, and my bulls need to be old enough to easily pass a breeding soundness exam. So I need those bulls to be 13 months of age or so. When I ask an 11 or 12-month-old bull to pass a breeding soundness exam, I'm really pushing him. I'd like those bulls to be a little bit older, ask him to pass a breeding soundness exam, and then be sold a month or two later, and then go into a client's herd, as a 1.5 year long yearling type of a bull. Well, then you start backing that up from the sale date, and you might get either a fall calving season or an early winter calving season to match the needs of clients all the way through. So I need those bulls to be old enough, those yearling bulls to be old enough that they're going to do well for my sale and do well for my clients if I'm a purebred producer. So sometimes that means I'm calving at a time when my cow costs are higher, that I'm going to have to supplement during a time of year when I don't have as much available growing forage. And so I'm going to have to supplement those cows more. And then I'm trying to offset that with the value of the product that I'm selling. So yeah, very different conversation with a purebred producer that's selling replacement stock versus a commercial producer that's really selling pounds. At one point or another in the process, they're selling pounds.
Mm-hmm. I think these purebred operators, it's a little bit of a dilemma with that. You're right, and we get the fact that they need to have those bulls ready to be good breeding animals when they hit that commercial guy's herd. But at the same time, the dilemma I think would be from a commercial guy is I'm a little cautious if I'm buying bulls from somebody that has maybe the cattle are in a whole different way that they're brought up. You know what I'm saying? I mean, because I want to pass on genetics that I know for me in kind of a flat, range environment that are going to be genetics that these cows are going to fit my environment. But if we got bulls that are growing in a different environment than what my cows are, that's a dilemma, isn't it? I guess I feel there's a bit of an issue that purebred guys have to deal with.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tension. It's hard to come out with a perfect answer that makes everybody happy. The only way you could sometimes match that up completely is, well, now if my purebred producer is calving at exactly the same time as my client animals, and they're spread over, 2-3 months, the younger age of those, the younger half of those bulls are barely old enough to go out and do their job. And then I'd have to hold them a whole nother year, which that's not going to happen. And that's probably not a good idea. So you're exactly right. There's a reason that just some of these decisions are hard. It's because there's pretty hard trade-offs.
Yeah. Well, and here's going to be sort of a tough thought or road to go down through with a commercial producer. If you are somebody that's selling and trying to go down that road and selling bulls, is looking at the value of what it is taking to put into that versus are you really getting the difference, that bonus in that animal that a commercial guy without all of that expense is at the end of the day, are your nets more or less than the commercial guy?
Yeah. And, we're getting into where you could easily insult somebody, but
we might.
I think it is really important to, many of the guys I work with, their bull suppliers are year over year relationships. And so maybe that bull supplier doesn't have the exact same calving season I do, and therefore they're managing their cows different than I do. But am I happy with how that bull performs? Am I happy with how his calves perform? That's one of the reasons to have year after year relationships. Is I've got my own information based on performance, and I'm going to ask those bulls not only to look good on the day I buy them, but to really perform well during my breeding season for several years. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm a little bit hesitant to. We're an industry that still is based on a handshake relationship and long-term relationships, and that's not bad. There is some real advantages to finding a supplier that really fits your needs really well. And, 1 or 2 or 3 suppliers, and you're basing that information on way more than just what could be. You've got information on how those bulls have really performed.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we really have to look at is set aside the emotional draw that some of this has. Maybe you love genetics. Maybe you like seeing a bull selling bulls. Maybe you like buying bulls, those kinds of things. Set aside some of the emotional side of this. And the other emotional side would be, we've always weaned 650-pound calves. We got to have a 650-pound calf. There's a lot of these factors of what we have been doing that I'm wanting. The purpose of this program here today is to challenge that. You still might be where you still might go and be in calf where you've been, but I want you to challenge and throw some things on the wall. And that's really kind of the point of this show here today.
Yeah, I think so. Income's on the numerator and costs are on the denominator. And that's really what I'm interested in. Is I want to generate good income, but not necessarily the highest. And I want to keep my costs low, but not necessarily the lowest. But I want the best combination of that. Where am I going to get the calf size, the calf growth? And I'll throw out, again, a lot of times my very first conversation with people is because of high death loss, right? At birth or in the first few weeks. And those calves also count as far as my lack of income over those winter cow costs or the cow costs for the year. And so I want a high percentage of calves weaned per cow exposed. I want them to be appropriate weight. So they're pretty old. They're old for their breeding season. And I've kept my cow costs appropriate for what I can manage. And that does include labor and some convenience factors there. So there's a lot to consider, but can I say it one more time? Mm-hmm. I really like my high lactating cows during early lactation to be out on green grass, and I don't like taking hay to them. And if I can manage that, now there may be a reason why a listener, that's just not going to work for them. But if I can manage that, it tends to make my life easier, and I tend to have a high percentage of calves weaned per cow exposed, and my cow costs are relatively low.
Mm-hmm. You bet. Okay, let's take another break. It's a good spot to take a break now. And when we come back, we'll just kind of wrap our conversation up here today. Again, we're talking about just tightening up or adjusting your calving window. Not only tightening up, we did talk about that a bit ago, but just adjusting that. And we'll wrap our conversation up when we come back here. This segment today brought to you by Igenity Beef from Neogen. Uncover your herd's potential with Igenity Beef. In a world of variables that are beyond our control, there's a tool that can provide certainty for your breeding program. I'm talking about Igenity Beef. It's the first genomic profile designed for crossbred commercial cattle. Now, here's a tool that's going to utilize DNA to rank the genetic merit for 17 key traits, from maternal to performance to carcass traits, as well as mitigate risk factors, for example, like congestive heart failure. It's time to take the gamble and the waiting game out of your breeding program. Make accurate decisions with confidence and uncover your herd's potential with Igenity Beef. To learn more, contact your Neogen representative today or visit neogen.com/Igenity-beef. All right, Dr. Larson, as we wrap up our conversation here today, the last segment, you really nailed some things to watch and evaluate in all of this. And I think when it comes to adjusting the calving window, as you had said, and to kind of reiterate again, if you could, just some of the factors that we really do need to consider in all of this.
Yeah, I think calving weather is really important. Breeding weather, we didn't talk about that very much, but particularly if you're in a really hot, humid area or on fescue, I think you have to avoid some of the hottest parts of summer and to have good breed up. I need my calves to be big enough. I need them to have enough days on them by the time I typically come off of grass that they're big enough. So I can't have them too late in the grazing season to really generate the income I need. But my cow cost when forage is dormant is a big driver in my overall costs. And so I need to kind of align that with, I'd like that time of year when I'm feeding a dormant forage to be at a time of the year when the cow has her lowest nutritional needs, which is when she's, mid-gestation, not lactating, not late gestation. And then I can get by with relatively low quality diet, and that cow just does pretty well. And then, of course, calf prices and the cyclical nature of calf prices. All of those go into the decision, which makes it a little bit different for every farm. And that's why optimum for one guy may be a little bit different than an optimum for somebody else. But those are the factors I think you have to think about is what are my total annual production costs, how much am I generating off of my cows, number of calves weaned, and the weight of those calves weaned. So, yeah, lots of things to think about, but those are important factors.
Yeah. I think something that's unique to today and where our market is at, where the calf prices are at, and even probably some hay prices in comparison to where they have been maybe 2 to 3 years ago when a vast part of the country was in a drought situation. And I would challenge producers to not take, because we have these higher prices, to just make poor management decisions because you're going to get taken care of regardless of that. And I believe by not really evaluating our calving window, again, you may change, you may not, but really evaluating that, I think we're not really being truthful and honest with ourselves, and we're allowing the market where it's at to basically erase some mistakes, management mistakes.
Yeah, I think it's really important to manage for optimum efficiency. And yeah, high calf prices can cover some sins, but they don't last forever. In my experience, that the earth turns, and that won't always be the case. And you want your system set up where you're doing kind of the same system year after year that's really matched your environment, your labor, your situation as well as it can. And maybe when high calf prices are as good a time as anything to really focus on getting what really fits your system as good as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you made a point there that I thought was interesting. The earth turns, it continues, meaning that things change. They continue to change. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things, as we challenged earlier in the program, to say, folks, if they've, we've always sold a 650 pound calf. We got to have that 650 pound calf. We haven't really evaluated and put it in a pencil, the input costs that go into that. I think how important is it we need to be reevaluating that really as the market ebbs and flows and the weather ebbs and flows. We almost have to reevaluate some of this. Now, again, we can't be jacking around with our calving window from year to year to year. I get that. We kind of need to find something and settle on it. But we do from time to time need to reevaluate some of this stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to throw out another opinion. I'd like to get my calving and breeding windows pretty well set. Then where I do have some options is when I wean. I can wean a little bit early. I can retain ownership on my operation for a little bit longer than typical. I've got some things on the backside. I think that's where to be more flexible and paying attention to what markets are. But on the front end, on when I calve and when I breed, I'd like that to align to the things that don't change. My rainfall patterns, my forage base, weather patterns. I'd like to align that as well as I could and leave the flexibility to kind of the back end.
That's a good point. And as you said that, it just rang clear that, yeah, you're right. If we can have those things, calving window, breeding cycle set down, we do have that flexibility to adapt drought year if we got to go early, or if, in this case for us in our particular part of the country, we've got a lot of forage. Maybe you can hold them calves a little longer than you normally would.
Either on the cow or weaned and on that grass. So there are some, obviously you need to be flexible. You'd hate to, there's too many moving parts to doing it the same way every year. But if I was going to do one thing the same every year, it'd be calving season.
All right. Well, that's a good way to end it. Dr. Larson, appreciate you being on our program here today. A very practical and relevant conversation to our industry. So good to have you here today on the program.
Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Good to visit with you. And again, our guest today, Dr. Bob Larson. He is a professor at Kansas State University there in the College of Veterinary Medicine. Appreciate him taking the time out to visit with us on a subject probably you don't hear an awful lot about. Yeah, it comes up in conversation from time to time, but I realize we're a ways out from when you would be putting in bulls and doing those kinds of things. But I think as you begin to look ahead into the year of 2026 and out, as you want to make some management changes in your operation, now's a good time to probably be thinking about that, as you need to kind of go through and plan through some of that. As we were talking there between the both of us, a lot of it just comes back to really analyzing your numbers, looking at your bottom line, looking at your input costs, your return on investment, and all of those kinds of things as they come together, and to make the right decision that fits your operation. And at the same time, not being afraid to question what you have been doing in the past as well. Let's take a break. When we come back, meteorologist Don Day will be in as we take a look at our long-range weather.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the WeatherStationExperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit MeasureRain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to MeasureRain.com.
And joining us now with a look at our long-range weather is meteorologist Don Day. Don, I know you're still on the road. Appreciate you taking the time to do that here as we look ahead for the next 7 to 10 days out. And as we were talking before we started here today, I said anything big that's on the horizon for the next 7 to 10 days. But, you know, this time of the year with the fall and things just weather is changing. That's what's normal, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, if we were to kind of pick out some highlights over the past week and the week ahead, we have seen a nice late season surge of moisture in the desert Southwest. And we have the remains of hurricane activity out in the eastern Pacific, Priscilla. And we saw some significant rains in Arizona, parts of western Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, even the deserts of Southern California. And really going back to late August through September, areas west of the divide that were really dry all summer have been able to pick up some needed moisture. So that's a highlight. The other highlight is we're just transitioning into the colder time of year. We haven't had that big outbreak of cold yet, but we've had frost conditions in the northern plains. We've just this recent past few days have had some freezing temperatures in the northeastern United States. So I guess the highlight is some late season moisture for the western sides of the divide in the southwestern United States. Kind of routine October weather elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. And that is an area, as you said before, that really kind of got skipped this summer. So it was much needed moisture. Another area that you'd said had been a little bit dry was kind of that eastern Corn Belt country and even the eastern half of the United States a little bit. We'll start there. And as we look 7 to 10 days out, what does it look like for that part of the country?
Well, it has been dry. You know, the central and east central and parts of the southeastern United States have really seen a dry pattern since August. And one reason for that is we've had tropical storm and hurricane activity out in the Atlantic, but it's not really been able to penetrate much rainfall inland. Now, that may change with Jerry coming up here, but it has been dry. Central and eastern Corn Belt, parts of the southeastern United States have seen drought conditions starting to develop. And while short term has got a little bit of precipitation in those areas, that east central part of the U.S. still looks to remain dry, in the southeast as well. But if we get some of that tropical activity a little bit further west, those southeastern mid-Atlantic states could see some moisture.
Okay, so let's move west. As we look ahead, and you had mentioned earlier that west side of the Continental Divide has really seen some moisture. Is that going to continue? And then just kind of on the other side of that just outside of that east side of the Continental Divide?
Well, so west of the divide, a lot of this precipitation has been from what we'd call extratropical, from these dissipating hurricanes and tropical storms where the flow has been just right to bring that in. But when you get into the second half of October and November, you lose that ability. It just starts to go away. However, for the Pacific Northwest, California, and parts of the Great Basin, we do see some opportunities for more precipitation, but it's going to come from Pacific cold fronts coming out of the North Pacific, not so much this tropical connection that we've seen lately. And right now, areas along and west of the divide are looking at better opportunities for moisture east of the divide, at least in terms of where the heaviest moisture will be. When we get into the second half of this month, into early November, weather systems become more frequent. They tend to move faster, and conditions will tend to change. And so some of those dry areas of the north central plains that haven't seen moisture here in a while will start to see that, I think, as we get to that last week of October, as we get closer to Halloween.
Okay. All right. Now, I just want an update a little bit on where the whole conversation of La Nina coming up, because I keep hearing some La Nina news coming out. What's your take on that?
Yeah, this is really important. Speaking of sea surface temperature anomalies, we are in a weak La Nina situation right now where the water temperatures near the equator, west of South America, along the equator to northeast of Australia, are a little bit colder than average. It's a weak La Nina, but the National Weather Service, this past week has come out with a La Nina advisory saying that La Nina conditions are going to persist through December. Now, this is important. A lot of news media is reporting that we're going to have a La Nina winter. However, the same prediction from the National Weather Service says that we're going to go to a neutral status January through March. There's a really big difference from a weak La Nina in the fall going to a neutral situation in the heart of winter. So it is a weak La Nina. It's going to be weakening as we get into winter. So the normal widespread impacts of a La Nina winter are just not going to happen. So I think people are misinterpreting this as a full-fledged La Nina winter when it's not going to be. It is a La Nina now, but it's weak, and it's going to get weaker as we hit winter.
Okay. So as you were saying, as we were talking before, an El Nino, or a La Nina, I should say, as you had said earlier, in the spring of the year is way different than one here in these next couple of months. So as we look, and what you'd said was more of a neutral phase into those winter months, what does that spell out? Well, I mean, what just trends from historic patterns, what does that sort of spell out and what you may see?
Well, as you and I have discussed many times on this podcast, when you have a very robust La Nina in place in winter and spring, it's a drought signal, or at least a drier than normal signal for a lot of the Western and Central United States. And I think that's why it's getting a lot of attention, because people are going, well, if we got a La Nina winter, we've got another drought coming on in parts of the Central and West. But there's a big difference between a La Nina in the fall and early winter compared to what it happens when we get into February, March, April, May, and June, because the spring months are the months when you get most of your precipitation. And if you're in a La Nina, that tends to make the precipitation events less productive. But we're not expecting that. So we're expecting the biggest, strongest part of La Nina to be on the front end, not the back end. And that's really important. So we should not interpret this particular La Nina as another ongoing situation where we've got another drought situation. I don't see that. That's why I'm concerned that folks are jumping on the La Nina bandwagon. And you got to remember, there's not one La Nina or El Nino that it's cookie cutter. It's the same every time. They're very nuanced, and it's the timing is critical, and the intensity of these are critical as well. We just can't put it in a neat little box.
Yeah, which we would really like that if you could do that. so the predictability is there. We always like that. But no, very good explanation on that, Don, and I appreciate you kind of going a little bit further on that. Good to visit with you, and we'll talk with you next week.
Sounds good.
And again, that is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather. If you want to follow each and every day along with his daily video podcast, you can find it by going to his website at dayweather.com. I'll tell you what we're planning for next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show after this. You're not going to want to miss next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Neville Spear will be in, as we'll be talking on really the base of the topic is looking at why are we seeing a reduction in the amount of cattle ranches across the country, but it will lead us down several different other topics as well. Everything from estate planning and succession planning to also topics, hot button issues like country of origin labeling and animal identification. And in addition to that, herd rebuilding and where the markets are at and where the psychological element is for the ranching industry and ranchers that are potentially could be looking at getting out, and where the customers are at, our beef consumers. So really it's a discussion that's going to lead us down a lot of different roads. So be sure to join us on next week's Working Ranch Radio Show, which, by the way, is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in next week, same time, same place, or on your favorite podcast provider. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.